Once upon a time, in a peaceful village in northern India, a group of deer lived near the people. These deer were very careful because they knew that people could be dangerous, especially during harvest time when the crops were ready to be picked. The farmers didn't want the deer to eat their crops, so they set traps to catch them. The deer knew this and only came close to the village at night when it was safer. Among these deer was a young doe. She was beautiful, with soft reddish-brown fur, a fluffy white tail, and big bright eyes. She was also very smart and always knew when to be careful. One day, a young buck who lived in the mountains wandered into the forest near the village. He was strong and brave, but he had never been around people before. When he saw the beautiful doe, he felt his heart skip a beat. He was so taken by her beauty that he thought he was in love, even though he didn't know anything about her. He imagined how wonderful it would be to be with her, just because of how pretty she looked. For days, the young buck watched the doe from a distance. He was nervous, but also very excited to talk to her. Finally, he decided it was time to introduce himself. He walked into the clearing where the doe was grazing, trying to look cool and confident. As he walked closer, he began to speak. "Oh, my beautiful doe, as lovely as the stars and bright as the moon, I must tell you that I—" But before he could finish his sentence, he tripped over a tree root and fell face first into a muddy puddle. The young doe saw what happened and smiled politely. But inside, she thought to herself, "This mountain buck seems a bit silly." Meanwhile, in the trees above, a group of fairies lived quietly. They had been watching the young buck try to impress the doe. When they saw him fall, they burst out laughing, thinking it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. "What a silly deer," they giggled. But one fairy, who was older and wiser, didn't laugh. He looked worried and said, "This young buck is too caught up in his feelings. I'm afraid he's headed for trouble." The young buck, although a bit embarrassed, didn't see any danger. He was too focused on the beautiful doe and didn't care about anything else. He kept following her around, telling her how beautiful she was and how much he loved her. But the doe, being smart, wasn't so easily impressed. She was kind to him, but she didn't pay him much attention. As night fell, it was time for the doe to go down to the village. She knew the way well and understood that it was risky to go there, but she had done it many times before and knew how to be safe. The young buck, still thinking only of the doe, wanted to go with her. The doe stopped and said to him, "My dear buck, you don't know how dangerous it is near the village. The people there set traps, and it's not safe for you. Please stay here in the forest, where it's safe." Up in the trees, the fairies watched and hoped that the young buck would listen to the doe's wise advice. But the buck didn't listen. He was too caught up in his feelings and didn't want to be away from the doe. He said, "Your eyes look so lovely in the moonlight," and kept walking beside her. The doe sighed and decided that if he wouldn't listen, at least she would try to keep him out of trouble. As they walked closer to the village, the doe began to sense danger. She could smell a human nearby and knew that a hunter might be waiting to catch any deer that came too close. She stopped again and said, "If you won't listen to me, at least be very quiet and stay close to me." The young buck agreed, but he was still too distracted by the doe's beauty to think clearly. As they approached the village, the doe could smell the hunter hiding in the bushes. She knew they were in real danger now. she decided to let the buck walk ahead of her while she stayed back a little. She hoped that by being cautious, they could avoid any traps. But the young buck, unaware of the danger, walked right into the hunter's trap. The hunter, who had been waiting quietly, saw the buck and quickly shot his arrow. The young buck fell to the ground, and the doe, terrified, turned and ran back to the forest as fast as she could. The hunter claimed his prize, cooked some of the meat for himself, and took the rest home to his family. The fairies, who had watched the whole scene, were very sad. Some of them cried, and some even blamed the doe for what had happened. But the wise fairy, who had warned them earlier, shook his head. "It wasn't the doe's fault," he said softly. The young buck was too blinded by his feelings to see the danger. It was his infatuation, his strong, unchecked feelings, that led him to this end. And so, the story of the mountain buck and the village doe teaches us an important lesson. Sometimes, when we get too caught up in our feelings, we can lose sight of what's really important and end up in trouble. It's important to stay smart and be careful, even when our hearts are full of excitement